Good morning and welcome back to another edition of the Front Page here on GNAT TV. My name is Andrew McKeever and I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be your host today, and it's also my pleasure to have with us today in the studio Senator Robert Hartwell. Bob, welcome back to GNAT.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
I say welcome back because you're no stranger to the station, having been here many times on many shows, but it's always a pleasure to have you with us. And just by way of introduction to the 3 or 4 people who may not know Senator Hartwell here around the area, Bob was first elected to the state Senate in 2006. He's been re-elected 2 times since then, is now going to be, presumably, running for a fourth term this year. It would certainly be news if you were to share that that was not the case, but we'll make that assumption for now. Bob is the chairman of the Senate Institutions Committee up in Montpelier and is also a member of the Senate Transportation Committee, and it's our pleasure to have him with us today to talk about a few things going on up in Montpelier. And Bob, I guess the area I thought we could start is a bill that you submitted earlier in the session that touched on a subject that kind of bubbled up a bit during town meeting season, and that I'm referring, of course, to the smart meter question. 4 towns in Bennington County passed resolutions encouraging CVPS and other utilities to, well, in one way or another, go slow on smart meters, or at least provide an opt-out provision. And your bill speaks to that question, I believe, but let you tell us a little bit about that bill and what prompted you to submit it.
The bill was submitted at the beginning of the session. I was working on it prior to January. I thought it was important, and I still do, that people have a choice about smart meters. There are some very serious issues associated with them in terms of the potential for invasion of privacy, a lot of open questions about health effects, and I seriously question their real value to the consumer in any event. So I think that people should have the choice to opt out. My bill actually was an opt-in bill that would have meant that if the ratepayer did nothing, then that would be interpreted to be they don't want the meters, so the current apparatus would stay in place. The bill was referred to the Committee on Finance, which has jurisdiction over the Public Service Board, and they made some changes in it. It's an opt-out without the fee until the utilities can show what it really costs not to have the meter installed. And there's a lot of evidence that it's less than the $10 a month. But whatever the number is, it turned out that the $10 fee was extremely obnoxious to a lot of consumers. And when I testified last Wednesday in the House, the bill, by the way, has been passed by the Senate. It's now over in the House. The House Natural Resources and Energy Committee has the bill now, and I testified last Wednesday, and it was clear that the chair doesn't like the opt-out fee either at all. In fact, there's some sentiment in the House, and there was some in the Senate, to get rid of it altogether. But the critical part for me is to allow people to make that decision as to whether they want this kind of equipment around. And there is a lot of scientific evidence accumulating that there are problems from a health standpoint, and these have been brushed aside routinely by the utilities. And the privacy issue is very interesting, that the sophistication of the equipment and its potential in the future would allow an invasion of privacy up to the point where it's possible that the utilities, and by inference the government, could find out a lot about what's going on in people's homes. And I think that's a serious issue.
Now, my understanding is that CVPS is not going to be charging anyone an opt-out fee until the entire smart meter network is installed completely, which I believe is scheduled to happen sometime in the middle of 2013. Does that change your thinking on that in any way? Or?
Well, it doesn't in terms of, and by the way, that change, if you will, occurred after the bill was introduced and after it was clear that it really is going somewhere. It is true that as I understand it, the opt-out fee won't be collected until April of 2013 or somewhere around then, when they can satisfy the Public Service Board as to what the true cost is. So I don't think it changes much about the bill. I'd like to see it pass the House, and for no other reason now, it sends a message that consumers do have a choice, rather than just inflicting a system on them that they may not understand or about which they have some fears. And this has been particularly, I think, problematic for people with older family members who have health issues, or with young children around, when you've got smart meters often installed outside of people's bedrooms and so forth. So I think this is a big issue, and is part of an ever-growing problem about whether there's privacy left or not in this society.
Speaking on the health issue, the Commissioner of Health, the state's Commissioner of Health, Dr. Harry Chen, seemed to give them a pretty clean bill of health a couple of weeks back, saying that basically the amount of radioactive or radio emissions that come out of smart meters is pretty minute. I guess I do find it puzzling, this business about the health question about it. I mean, I actually kind of got interested in this subject a few months back and did as much research as I could on my own. And my understanding is, and you may have other information on this, and I don't want to get too bogged down in the science of it, but I mean, the amount of emissions you get out of a 10-minute cell phone conversation is less exposure than in a year and a half of being 9 feet away from a smart meter 24/7 for a year and a half. I mean, if that's the case, why on earth is there any panic over health issues around smart meters?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that's the case. And there is a lot of evidence, and there was a lot of testimony in the Senate Committee on Finance, and I trust there will be in the House Committee as well, that there are some serious issues associated with smart meters, and it's been pursued more vigorously in other countries. Mm-hmm. It's an issue in Europe. It's an issue in other places. And the problem is, and this is one of the things that the chair of the Finance Committee, Senator Cummings, found most troubling about this, is that we don't know the extent of the exposure. We don't know the extent of the effect of being in a house where there's a smart meter and that signal is constantly coming in. And I think it's appropriate to find out the truth about it. And I disagree with the Commissioner of Health, a person whom I personally like, but I disagree. I thought they were, that the administration's position probably is sweep it away as fast as you can, install all of this, because it's a part of a bigger so-called green technology scheme for the utilities and so forth. And I don't think it's green at all. And there's some other things they're doing that I don't think are as green either, by the way. But rather than rush to it, maybe we really ought to find out the truth. And there is a lot of evidence that this really is problematic.
Coming from where? Because I know smart meters aren't per se a new thing, new. They have been installed in other states, other countries, as you say. I mean, by now, would there not be some body of evidence to say, well, there's an issue here, an issue there, or is this going to be one of these things where we won't know until 20 or 30 years from now?
Well, my impression is we won't know entirely for a while, but there's definitely evidence of problems with it in Europe, and it's been stopped in some places. It was started in California and led to a very unpleasant struggle between the consumers and the utilities, and the consumers started taking them off their houses and so forth, and that had to be resolved, and they're being allowed to take them off. It was a problem in Connecticut. They've never been fully deployed, and in Maine it became a big problem because the utilities started showing them at night and trying to install them on the sly, which raised an entire trespass issue that got ugly. So rather than go through all of that and in this rush to judgment, and we ought to look at it carefully. And one of the problems with this is that it's substantially being financed by the federal government.
Part of the stimulus, the ARRA program.
It's part of the ARRA program, the Recovery Act program. It's a piece of the Recovery Act I admit I don't like. I'd much rather had that money going into roads and bridges where you really stimulate employment and recovery. This is doing very little for economic recovery.
What about the conservation aspect of this? It seems to me we've all talked a lot about conservation as part of a green strategy in Vermont for saving energy. Conservation, and I was just reading an article in last week's Economist magazine about a smart meter project in Oklahoma City, where basically in Oklahoma they had put in a smart meter network to help conservation measures bring down the amount of energy and oil and fossil fuels that they were using, and it's actually been fairly successful, at least according to that article. But it seems to me that if we're ever going to have a robust conservation strategy here in Vermont, we need to have an ability on the part of the utilities to really precisely calibrate and measure how they buy energy, whether it's on peak, off peak, or whatever, and give consumers, and this is their big argument in favor of a smart meter, I think, the information about what appliances are being used at certain times of the day, so that you can look at a printout, I guess, and say, oh, well, if I ran my dishwasher at 3 in the morning rather than 3 in the afternoon, I'd save some money, and therefore you would save electricity. I mean, how does a robust conservation program work in the absence of a near universal smart meter system?
Well, I think it works because one of the things that I find interesting about the smart meters is that they intrude a lot on people's private lives. I don't need the power companies to tell me not to plug in a hybrid plug-in car at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in July. I just don't need that. If I already know that, I already know when to run the dishwasher. I already know how to smooth out the consumption of power. I just think it's a scheme, really, to allow them to get the most favorable rates they can get. And it's much more advantageous to the utility than it is to the consumer. So I find it hard to believe that people don't understand that it might be better to run the dishwasher at 11 o'clock at night than at 7 o'clock at night. And so I think it's superfluous. I might add that it's going to become very clear, I think, very shortly, that this entire system could have been installed without putting the meters actually on the house. And so that's a system of using the poles and wires and so forth for a wireless system. And there's no doubt in my mind that that's coming very quickly, and this will have been already an antiquated system that allows a lot of intrusion into people's homes. I think it's a big issue, and I think that you're going to find that intelligence agencies even find this interesting. And then you have the government's financing a lot of it, so there's going to be a government say about it. I mean, over half of this system in Vermont is going to be paid for a lot of these grants under the Recovery Act that would have been better used elsewhere, in my view.
Well, I guess they made a decision back in 2009 to spend it on that, and I think there is a time limit on that. If the system is not installed by a certain date, then that money, $63 million, if I remember correctly, goes away.
I think that's right.
I don't recall exactly what that deadline is, but it's not 10 years down the road by any means. So they are under a bit of time pressure to...
Well, there are a lot of deadlines under the Recovery Act, including a lot of the infrastructure work that we've been doing that can't just be stretched out forever. In fact, serving on the Transportation Committee, I can tell you that we have pretty much worked our way through the recovery money on the infrastructure.
Well, the utilities have been in the news for another reason recently in the last week or so, and while we're talking about smart meters and stuff, it seems like a perfect opportunity to get your take on this little imbroglio that CVPS and Green Mountain Power have gotten into over this $21 million payback, I guess you could call it, or payment of monies that were given to CVPS in 2001, I think, when they came up with a problem with a contract with Hydro-Quebec. That certainly seems to have kind of reached some kind of, boiling point last week in Montpelier. We're here taping the show on Monday, April 8th, and so by the time many viewers are watching this, this situation may have been resolved. But what's going on here? Is CVPS's and Green Mountain Power, I guess the senior partner in this merger, want to, instead of writing checks or giving credits to people on their electric bills, would like to see weatherization or efficiency improvements, use the money that way.
Well, that's what they're doing.
What's wrong with that?
Well, there's a big problem with it. They want to use it for efficiencies, and weatherization keeps cropping up. Not that that's highly relevant in my view, but as a way to avoid paying back. But the real problem is they get it back in the rates down the road anyway. So we're basically paying twice. And it's a bad deal for the consumer. It's a bad deal for the ratepayer. It's a good deal for the utilities. And they mask it in promises of hundreds of millions of dollars worth, that's the quote, of efficiencies they can't possibly show, and they never have shown to anybody's satisfaction that I know of in the legislature. And this issue did explode last week, and I'm glad it did, because it's not a very good deal for ratepayers. It causes me to question whether or not the Department of Public Service, which is the agency that's supposed to represent the public, the ratepayers, before the Public Service Board, is really doing its job. And I've been convinced for years that it really doesn't. It's really much more favorably inclined to the industry anyway. I'm not sure that that system is even structured properly. And I'm beginning to wonder whether in the next legislative session we need to take a hard look at how this whole area of regulation of the utilities is being handled. Because the merger is a very, very good deal, for executives and investors. Whether or not it's a good deal for ratepayers is a whole other question. And some people are going to make a lot of money and a lot of people aren't. So people are not happy with it, and it's not along party lines, and people are unhappy with the administration over this. I am, to be honest about it. Republicans don't like it, Democrats don't like it, there are progressives who don't. It's a very cross-partisan issue, apparently, based on the people that are trying to deal with it in both houses.
One of the things that Green Mountain Power has tried to emphasize in the last couple of days, at least as far as I've been able to follow it, is that if they yank out this $21 million thread here and don't let the weatherization plan go through, which they claim would eventually save somewhere in the range of $40 million or so, that the entire deal could be scuttled, that the merger between CVPS and GMP, could just go down the drain. Do you think that's a realistic possibility if this goes away? Or, I mean, my take on it would be, how can a $21 million problem that everyone knew about going in, sort of undermine a deal valued over $700 million?
I find that very hard to believe, too. I think that that was the threat that a couple of lobbyists came up with about 10 days ago when this issue began to explode, was if the 21 million is a central issue and they don't get to treat it the way they want to, that scuttles the deal. And that's very hard for people to believe. And as you say, they knew about it going in, and the Department of Public Service made a deal, supposedly on behalf of the ratepayers, a bad deal. And you run the risk with a bad deal of infecting the merger, and that they should have known that going in. And I think they do know it going in. So they'll have to live with that. And I'm not sure yet what action, if any, the legislature would take at this point. But it really raises the question of these kinds of very broad, amorphous claims that the utilities constantly make about how much money everybody's going to save with the merger, and how the 21 million is better spent on some weatherization scheme, which is stretched way down the road in time, is very typical of this deal. And there are people who are going to be paid a lot of money in golden parachutes. There's all kinds of money in this deal. So to suggest that $21 million makes a difference is a very hard reach for someone like me.
Yeah, it seems like a stretch, but I guess who knows? But only the governor and a few others, I guess. Well, let's move on. We have a few minutes left, Bob, and I know there are a lot of other bills that you've been working on or interested in, and I know one of your main interests in, and reflected by your role there in the Transportation Committee, is bringing passenger rail or enhanced train service to Bennington County and our area. I read recently there was some money that came from the federal government to improve the tracks between Rutland and Burlington. Doesn't sound like that helps us too much down here, but can you update us on kind of what's going on in terms of passenger rail service in Bennington County?
Well, there's the so-called Track 3 study, which is funded by the federal government and both states, is well underway. It'll be finished this year as to what needs to be done to upgrade track, some of which is already upgraded, and to deal with rail crossings and other issues and how much money it's going to cost and what are the environmental impacts. The thing that's very good about the Track 3 project, unlike probably any other such study in the country, is that a lot of the actual requirements to do, such as the environmental impact statement that has to be done, are actually underway as the study goes on. Often what happens is you get a study, you get a nice, we've done this before, you get a nice study and then you can put it on the shelf. In this case, it's going to be a lot harder to do because there are some of the processes that are required here are underway already. So when this project, when this study is complete later this year, a lot of the compliance work and the environmental work and the safety-related issues that have to be assessed on the crossings and so forth, that will already be well underway. So my hope is that we won't make the mistake again of trying to get a grant just for the Track 2 piece, which is Rutland to Burlington. That's been turned down 3 times by the federal government because they want us to do the whole thing. Put 2 and 3 together, bring the train in from Albany through North Bennington, Manchester, up to Rutland, and then all the way to Burlington. While that's all going on, we have the Track 1 project, which is from St. Albans to all the way to New Haven, Connecticut. That's well underway. And that'll probably be finished in the Vermont piece this year, and that'll speed up that train some. And then the switching problem that's in Palmer, Massachusetts, the engine switching that has to occur there will be eliminated, and that track will be shortened in Massachusetts and be faster. So that project is a really good project, and will get done. It's underway in all 3 states. This one has to wait for the end of the study, but and the money you refer to that's being spent in the piece between Rutland and Burlington now is really savings from a bridge project in Rutland County that didn't cost nearly as much money as we thought, freed up about $5 million.
Yeah.
So that went into expenses on the Rutland to Burlington piece, which I think probably is going to relate mostly to crossings, I think. And there's some track improvements. But they can't do track 2. They're going to need $60 or $70 million at least to do that. And we may need that much down here, and it could be a $150 million project. Well worth it, but the real problem is whether or not we can get rail grants from the federal government and try to perhaps leverage those with our own bonding authority.
One of the things that's always kind of puzzled me a little bit about the idea of bringing passenger rail to Bennington County, and you're the perfect person to ask this question, is it's never been clear to me how many people would ride that train, either from, let's say, Manchester or Rutland to Albany or vice versa, or the case has been made to me that, well, the real target would be people in Manhattan or Westchester or Fairfield County who would ride the train through Albany up here. Has there ever been a ridership study done that would really say, well, if we built this train and it ran at 60 miles an hour from Albany to Bennington to make it competitive with driving, there will be X thousands of people per week or hundreds of people per week?
Well, yes, the answer is yes, and this study will require that. There will be a passenger assessment. One of the problems that we had with the study was we discovered that a lot of the required contact work with hotels and ski areas and so forth wasn't really getting done. So some changes have been made in the way that the Track 3 study is being administered, but it's the same consulting firm, but to be sure that we're getting the accurate counts. And there is a system when you do one of these rail grant studies to measure passenger, and you'll see that. You're going to be able to see how many people are anticipated to come to Manchester, for example, on a train, and where they're likely to come from. And Manhattan, New York City, is a big target area for this, and Westchester County, and because the train passes through those areas, whereas the Connecticut population might be more attracted to the Track 1 piece because they can pick that up in Fairfield County and take it to Brattleboro and beyond. But the New York State side of it is very, very important, and we think there's a lot of potential flow out of there. And now we've got, Albany Rensselaer Station is the 10th busiest rail station in the country now, and there are improvements, even more improvements being put in that area as well. So yes, there'll be a passenger study. There'll be a fairly specific count about how many people we can expect. Yeah,
because I often wondered, because on one hand, every time gas prices go up another notch, and they're probably about to break through $4 a gallon for regular any day now, one would think that makes a train more competitive. And yet, on the other hand, it seems like there's a lot of a cheaper alternative, I guess, to bring people from Albany to Manchester would be like a bus service. One would think they could be run several times a day as opposed to, let's say, I'm assuming we're looking at one train trip a day. Has there ever been any thought given to something like that? Or?
Well, there is thought to the bus service, and there was a time when there was one. One of the problems there is we had to offer a pretty big subsidy to get anyone to do that, apparently.
Even like a little sort of jitney bus?
Well, they're having the same problems.
Greyhound?
Well, it used to be Greyhound, which was nice, but they have their own fuel problems, fuel cost problems. But the thing that's different about the train is this train, if this is done the way it ought to be done, would run all the way through and keep going. It's not just servicing North Bennington or Manchester. We thought about one of the alternatives was running the train to Manchester and sending it back. That doesn't seem to make much sense. If it passed through this area, it would go on to Rutland or on to Burlington. And if you put those markets into it, it's different than just the issue of whether you can run a bus from North Bennington to Albany, Rensselaer.
Okay. In the few minutes we have left, any other bills going on up there that you feel you would like to just mention or tell the viewers about?
There's a lot going on, and there's so much going on now. You wonder how you can get done by April 27th.
Is that your projected adjournment date?
That's the date we're looking at. I wouldn't be surprised if it's May 4th, but it's pretty early when you consider the extent of what's going on, the issues that are there are a lot of issues that are really important. And the storm, Irene, got her fingerprints onto absolutely everything. And in my Committee on Institutions, of which I'm the chair, we are about to vote out a bill either tomorrow or Wednesday that will be the capital budget adjustment bill for the second half of the biennium. And that is where a lot of the Waterbury State Complex recovery money and policy is. So it's a very important bill. Involves the moving of the state hospital and relocating it in another location in central Vermont, which is a tremendous breakthrough. We've kind of been kicking the can, if you will, of the state hospital down the road for years, and Irene forced our hand on that, which is one of the good things out of all of the mayhem.
That's the way it happens sometimes.
It does. It's very strange how you get forced to do something because you just can't go back to a critical facility like that with the water around, whereas we can substantially repair Waterbury. We're going to remove some old and non-historic buildings that are in the way of the floodway. We've learned that the way the place is set up really causes havoc during a flood, and we think we can mitigate that a lot and still use that property and join in with the town of Waterbury on some of their things that they want to do. So I'm very, very happy about the emphasis on Waterbury, and this is a good bill for that purpose and for getting on to building 21st century office space and trying to get people back to where they were as soon as we possibly can, because right now employees are scattered all over the state. It's a very, very difficult situation. We're losing some employees because of the amount of driving that's going on, and the $4 gas is not helping our cause. So the sooner we can lay out a design and get the construction started, I think the psychological effect of that would be very positive. So it's very important.
I'd love to ask you a question about property taxes, which I know is one of your favorite subjects. We're just about out of time, but
do you want a quick harangue? I'd be happy to deliver.
We could go for another 30 minutes here on that subject, I'm sure. But I guess just in the few minutes that we do have left, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of pressure building on the property tax. I think it's scheduled to go up at least 1, perhaps 2 cents this year. And I've been reading some kind of troubling reports, at least it seemed troubling to me, that it could indicate that next year there could be even more. I mean, we could see a really sharp increase in the property tax, more than 1 or 2 cents. Is that anything we need to be keeping our eyes on?
Oh, absolutely. You definitely need to be keeping our eyes on it. It will go up more, and there are a number of problems here. And since one of which is just simply no incentive in the Act 60 system to really control costs the way they have to be controlled. But the other problem is, and this has been on center stage to some extent this year in the legislature, is the constant, incessant temptation of administration people and some people in the legislature to raid the education fund for other matters. You put the word education on a bill and you think you can go tap into the education fund. And we had a battle over this in the budget adjustment on the general fund side when a provision passed the House which would require half of future general fund surpluses to go to the education fund. Passed easily in the House, got into the Senate, and was stripped out by the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. When it got to the floor, some senators proposed a motion to restore the requirement that we fund the education fund with general fund surpluses in the future. And most Republicans voted for it. Only 3 of us on the Democratic side voted for that provision. 3 Democratic senators, of which I'm one, and to really send a tough message about this issue, about raiding the education fund, because if we stop that, and right now there's about $73 million worth of appropriations coming out of the education fund that really don't relate to public education K through 12. Well, there's even current use funding coming out, and these are the kind of bad practices we need to deal with, and that would mitigate the property tax problem a lot.
Well, to be continued, I guess. That's a story we can talk about some more, I'm sure, in a few months down the road. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you,
Really
Andrew.
a pleasure to have you with us on the show, and as always, very informative as well. And thank all of you for listening out there and watching. This has been The Front Page on GNAT TV. My name's Andrew McKeever. Been here with my friend Senator Bob Hartwell, and have a great day.